When a desperate alien woman trades herself for shelter at a remote hydrofarm on the rogue planet Cryonith, in the dead of winter, she expects nothing more than survival. But the enigmatic, retired human warrior who takes her in offers something she never dared hope for: genuine acceptance. As her dark past arrives to destroy the fragile sanctuary they've built together, will Nivra finally find the courage to fight for the home and love she never believed she deserved? The wind screamed like a dying animal through the streets of Cryo Spaceport, Cryonith territory, carrying ice crystals that cut Nivra's face like tiny knives. December of 2181 had brought the worst winter anyone could remember, and she pressed herself deeper into the doorway of the Graviton Cantina, watching her cerulean breath turn to frost in the air. 3 cycles without nutrient paste, 4 nights sleeping in whatever shelter she could find, her fingers had turned white at the tips, and she couldn't feel her biodampeners anymore inside her worn-out boots. The smell of hot synthetic stew drifted from the cantina's cracked viewport, making her stomach twist with hunger so sharp it felt like being stabbed. Nivra pulled her mother's thin, shimmering shawl tighter around her shoulders. The gossamer fabric was all she had left of her homeworld, along with the data ring on her finger that she'd been too stubborn to sell yet. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You made your choice, Nivra. Live with it." Those had been his last words to her before he severed their transmission. A burst of warm light spilled onto the frozen street as the cantina's grav door swung open. Human miners stumbled out, laughing and pushing each other, their faces red from synthale and heat. One of them spotted her huddled in the shadows. Well, what do we have here?" Jax Morrison's voice made her skin crawl. He'd been bothering her since she'd arrived in town, offering her work that wasn't really work at all. "Still playing hard to get, darling?" Nivra tried to shrink further into the doorway, but there was nowhere to go. Jax stepped closer, and she could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the mean glint in his eyes that meant trouble. "I told you, Jax, I'm not interested." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, shaky from a cold and fear. "Come now, we both know you don't have many choices left." Jax reached for her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "My offer still stands. A nice warm bunk, 3 rations a day. All you have to do is be friendly." Nivra jerked away from his touch, her heart pounding. She'd rather freeze to death than accept what Jax was offering. She'd rather die with whatever dignity she had left than become what everyone already thought she was. The lady said no. The voice came from behind Jax, deep and calm like distant thunder. A tall man stepped out of the shadows near the cantina, his combat boots crunching in the quantum snow. Even in the dim light, Nivra could see he was different from the other men in the outpost cleaner, steadier, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make himself heard. Jax spun around, his hand moving to the laser pistol at his hip. "This ain't your business, Callaway." "Making it my business." The stranger, Callaway, didn't seem worried about Jax's gun. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd faced down bigger threats than a drunk miner. "Step away from the lady." "Lady?" Jax laughed, but there was nervousness in the sound now. "You don't know what she is, do you? This here's Nivra Solys, one of those crimson-eyed freaks. Ask anyone in the outpost about her reputation." Something cold that wasn't the weather settled in Nivra's chest. Here it was again, the poison that followed her everywhere, the lies that had destroyed her life once already, ready to do it again. But Callaway didn't even blink. "Don't care what anyone says. I can see what she is right now, cold, hungry, and being bothered by a man who won't take no for an answer." Jax's face darkened. For a moment, Nivra thought he might actually draw his gun. The 2 men stared at each other across the snowy street, tension crackling between them like lightning before a plasma storm. Then Jax spat in the snow and turned away. "She's not worth the troubles anyway," he muttered, stumbling back toward the cantina. Nivra sagged against the doorway, relief making her legs weak. But when she looked up at her rescuer, she found him studying her with eyes that were too knowing, too perceptive. "You're hurt," he said simply. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, even though they both knew it wasn't true. Callaway pulled off his heavy combat coat and held it out to her. "No, you're not. When's the last time you ate?" Nivra stared at the coat, afraid to trust this kindness. In her experience, men didn't help women without expecting something in return. Why do you care? Maybe because someone should. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the scar running down the left side of his face, the silver threads in his dark hair. Name's Marcus Callaway. I own a hydro farm north of here, Nivra Solys. The name felt heavy on her tongue, weighted with all the shame that came with it. I know. Marcus held her gaze steadily. Been watching you for 3 cycles, Nivra. Watching you try to find honest work. Watching you go hungry rather than accept Jax's offer. That tells me something about your character. You don't know anything about me. Nivra's voice broke on the words. You don't know what I've done, what people say about me. I know you're still fighting when most people would have given up. Marcus draped his coat around her shoulders, and the warmth of it nearly made her cry. I know you'd rather freeze than compromise what's left of your dignity. The coat smelled like synthetic leather, ozone, and something else, safety, maybe. Nivra pulled it closer, feeling truly warm for the first time in days. I need someone to manage the station, Marcus said quietly. Cook, clean, basic things. Room and board, plus credits. Honest work for an honest cycle's pay. Nivra's heart started beating faster. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? No catch. Just hard work and a chance to start over. Marcus's eyes were steady on hers. Question is, are you brave enough to take it? The hover wagon ride to Marcus's hydro farm stretched through a wilderness that seemed carved from ice and silence. Nivra sat beside him on the Durasteel bench, acutely aware of every bump in the frozen road. Every whine of the anti-grav engines, every cloud of breath that hung in the air between them. She'd said yes to his offer because she was desperate. But now that they were alone together on this empty trail, doubt crept through her like cold wind through cracked walls. What did she really know about Marcus Callaway? Only that he'd stood up at Jax Morrison and offered her work when no one else would. How far to your hydro farm? She asked, needing to break the silence that pressed down on them like the gray sky overhead. About 2 hours in good weather. Might take longer today with the quantum snow. Marcus kept his eyes on the trail ahead, his hands steady on the controls. Plasma storms coming in tonight. We'll make it before it hits. Nivra nodded, though she wasn't sure if he was talking about the weather or something else. The hum of the engines made soft thumping sounds in the snow, and she could hear the distant call of a scavenger drone circling high above them. Tell me about the work, she said. Nothing fancy. Managing hydroponics, cleaning conduits, mending gear, basic station keeping. Marcus glanced at her briefly. Place has been falling apart since my sister moved to the core worlds last spring. I'm better with plasma reactors than I am with housekeeping. You live alone? The question slipped out before Nivra could stop it, and she immediately regretted asking. It sounded too personal, too forward. For the past cycle, yes. Something in Marcus's tone suggested there was more to that story, but he didn't offer details. The work's honest, Nivra, nothing more, nothing less. She wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her to be careful. Men said things they didn't mean, made promises they never intended to keep. Still, what choice did she have? Jax Morrison's offer was the only other option, and that wasn't really an option at all. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling dunes covered in quantum snow stretched as far as she could see, broken by stands of crystalline trees and the occasional rock formation. It was the kind of country that could kill you if you weren't careful. But it was also clean and honest in a way that starports never were. It's bigger than I expected, she said. Cryonith has room to spare. Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and it changed his whole face. Most folks find it too empty, too quiet, but I like the space. Nivra understood that feeling. Right now, space sounded like the most precious thing in the world. They crested a hill, and the hydro farm spread out below them like something from a picture book. A 2-story structure with shimmering energy fields rising from the reactor, surrounded by biodomes and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and careful planning. It was bigger than she'd imagined, more substantial. Your father's place? She asked, his and his father's before him, built to last through anything Cryonith could throw at it. Pride crept into Marcus's voice. Generations of Callaways have worked this land. The hover wagon rolled down the hill toward the station buildings, and Nivra felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could find a place here, earn enough credits to start over somewhere new. Maybe she could finally outrun the reputation that followed her like a shadow. Marcus pulled the wagon up to the front hatch and climbed down, then came around to help her. His hands were strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. And for just a moment, she felt what it might be like to be treated with genuine respect. Inside, the house was cold but solid. Dust covered the terminals, and there were ration packs piled in the reclamation chute, but underneath the neglect, Nivra could see the bones of a real home. Holophotographs lined the mantel, handmade quilts were folded on chairs, and books filled shelves built into the walls. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right," Marcus said, setting her small bundle of belongings on the kitchen counter. "I'll get a fusion reactor started and make some caffeine." Nivra climbed the narrow stairs, her hand trailing along the smooth metallic banister. The room he'd given her was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a quilt that had been stitched together by loving hands. A window looked out toward the mountains, and for the first time in months, she had privacy, safety, four walls that were hers alone. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to breathe. The silence of the house was different from the silence of the streets warmer somehow, full of possibility instead of despair. Downstairs, she could hear Marcus moving around in the kitchen, the soft sounds of someone preparing a meal. When she joined him, he had coffee brewing and was slicing synthetic bread with practiced ease. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "Badly, but I manage." Marcus handed her a cup of caffeine, and the warmth of it spread through her hands like a blessing. "Tomorrow you can show me how it's really done." They ate in comfortable silence. Bread and butter, cold processed meat from the pantry, caffeine strong enough to wake the dead. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best meal Nivra had eaten in weeks. "There's something you should know," Marcus said as they finished eating. "People in the outpost will talk about you working here, about us being alone together. Doesn't matter that it's all perfectly proper, folks will gossip anyway." Nivra set down her mug, her brief moment of peace shattered. "You're having second thoughts?" "No," Marcus's voice was firm. "But I want you to be prepared. I want you to know that whatever they say, it won't change anything here. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be. Home." The word hit Nivra like a physical blow. When was the last time anywhere had felt like home? "Why," she whispered. "Zaelen," he whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his caffeine. When he looked up, his eyes held something she couldn't quite name. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply. "And because I think you're stronger than you know." Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and moaning around the corners of the house. The storm Marcus had predicted was coming, but for the first time in months, Nivra wasn't afraid of it. She was inside. She was warm, and she was home. Nivra's scream pierced the dawn air as a conduit in the kitchen stove shorted, shooting sparks into her shimmering sleeve as she tried to cook breakfast on her third morning at the hydro farm. Marcus burst through the door, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and doused both the flame and Nivra in one swift motion. She stood there, dripping and shaking, staring at the blackened mess that had been meant to be synthetic eggs and bacon. "I can't even cook a simple breakfast," she whispered, tears mixing with the coolant on her cheeks. "What kind of station manager am I?" "The kind who's learning." Marcus handed her a towel, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "That stove's got a mind of its own. Takes practice to figure out its moods." Nivra wrapped the towel around herself, embarrassment burning hotter than the flame had. In her old life, she'd helped her mother prepare elaborate nutrient-paced dinners, but this fusion-powered stove was like a wild animal compared to the replicator they'd had in the city. "Maybe you should find someone else," she said quietly. "Someone who actually knows what they're doing. You giving up already?" Marcus started cleaning up the mess without making her feel worse about it. "Because I distinctly remember offering you a job, not expecting perfection on day 3. Over the next hour, Marcus patiently showed her the tricks of the temperamental stove, how to read the color of the plasma flames when Mongs, when to add more fuel where the hot spots were that could burn food in seconds. His hands guided hers as he taught her to adjust the thermal regulators, and Nivra found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The calluses on his palms, the careful way he moved, the patience in his voice that never wavered even when she made the same mistake twice. Why don't you have a wife to do this? The question popped out before she could stop it. Marcus went still beside her. I did, almost. He straightened up, brushing ash from his hands. Emma died 2 winters ago. A fever took her just before our wedding. The pain in his voice was so raw that Nivra felt it in her own chest. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's natural to wonder. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields. This place was supposed to be ours. Sometimes I think I keep it going just because she'd be mad if I let it fall apart. Nivra studied his profile against the morning light. There was something about the way he held himself that spoke of a man carrying more weight than just running a hydro farm alone. She'd been so focused on her own problems that she hadn't considered he might have reasons of his own for offering work to a stranger. She must have been special, Nivra said softly. She was. Marcus turned back to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She would have liked you, I think. Emma believed everyone deserved a chance to prove who they really were. The next few days fell into a rhythm that surprised Nivra with its comfort. She learned to read the stove's moods, discovered that the pump in the kitchen sink would freeze if you didn't run it regularly, and figured out which floor panels creaked loud enough to wake Marcus when she moved around early in the morning. Marcus proved to be a thoughtful employer in ways she hadn't expected. He always thanked her for meals, never criticized her mistakes, and had a habit of leaving things where she'd find them. Warmer clothes on her dresser after a cold snap, a jar of synth honey when they ran out of sugar, data chips he thought she might enjoy. But it was the small moments that began to change something inside her. The way he talked to his bioengineered livestock with the same gentleness he showed her. How he always made sure the fusion reactor was full before she had to ask. The evening she found him in the biodome with an injured synth calf, speaking to it in a voice so tender it made her chest tight. You're good with them, she'd said from the doorway. Marcus looked up, startled. Animals don't lie to you. They tell you exactly what they need, and they don't judge you for your past mistakes. Nivra understood that feeling better than he knew. One morning while dusting the front room, she discovered a hollow photograph tucked behind some books on the mantel. A young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, her arm linked through Marcus's. Both of them looked impossibly young and happy, like people who believed the world would always be kind to them. That was Emma. Marcus's voice came from behind her, quiet and careful. Nivra spun around, the photograph trembling in her hands. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to pry. It's all right. Marcus stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. I put it there after she died. Couldn't bear to see it every day, but couldn't put it away completely either. Nivra studied the photograph again, seeing the way Emma looked at Marcus like he was her whole world. You loved her very much. I did. Marcus took the photograph gently from Nivra's hands and set it back on the mantel, this time in plain sight. But loving someone doesn't mean you stop living when they're gone. Emma would be the first to tell me that. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, Marcus mending a power conduit and Nivra sewing a tear in her tunic, Nivra found herself stealing glances at him. There was something different about the way he moved now. Less careful, more settled, as if putting Emma's photograph back where it belonged had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. Marcus, she said suddenly. He looked up from his work. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. Marcus set down the conduit and really looked at her, his gray eyes serious. Thank you for taking it. This place feels like a home again. Outside, the wind howled around the station, but inside, Nivra felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the desperate peace of survival, but the quiet contentment of belonging somewhere. She was beginning to understand that home wasn't just a place. It was the feeling of being wanted, of being useful, of having someone notice when you were gone. It was the sound of Marcus's boots on the landing pad at the end of the day, the smell of caffeine in the morning, the comfortable silence that had grown between them. But even as that realization warmed her, A small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Good things didn't last, not for women like her. Sooner or later, the past always caught up. She pushed the thought away and focused on her sewing, trying to ignore the way her heart had started beating faster whenever Marcus smiled at her. This was work, nothing more. A temporary arrangement that had given her back her dignity and a chance to save credits for a fresh start somewhere else. But as she watched Marcus's hands work the wire with practiced skill, Nivra couldn't shake the feeling that leaving this place, leaving him, was going to be harder than she'd expected. Someone's been asking questions about you in the outpost. Marcus's words hit Nivra like cold water as she stood at the kitchen sink washing breakfast dishes on a sunny February morning. Her hands stilled in the soapy water. What kind of questions? The kind that come from someone who knows you. Marcus leaned against the door frame, his face serious. Bill Henderson mentioned it yesterday when I went for supplies. Said a well-dressed man had been in the general store asking if anyone had seen Nivra Solys. Nivra's heart began to pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. Only one person would be looking for her, and it wasn't someone who wanted to help. Did he say what this man looked like? She asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. Claimed to be your brother. Marcus stepped closer, studying her face. You want to tell me why that news just turned you white as a sheet? Nivra dried her hands on her apron, buying time to think. She'd known this day would come eventually. Zaelen had too much pride to let her disappear without trying to drag her back into his control. Zaelen isn't here out of brotherly concern, she said finally. He's here because I know things about him that could ruin his reputation if they got out. What kind of things? Nivra moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful hydro farm where nothing seemed threatening, but she knew that peace was about to be shattered. Zaelen has always been good at making himself look respectable while doing things that weren't. He's charming, educated, knows how to say the right words to the right people. She pressed her palms against the cool glass. But I've seen what he's really like when no one important is watching. Marcus waited, not pushing, letting her find her own words. 3 cycles ago, Zaelen was courting the daughter of father's business partner, a sweet girl named Alara, barely 18. She trusted him completely. Nivra's voice grew hard. Zaelen convinced her to meet him alone one evening. When she refused his advances, he didn't take it well. What happened? Alara's family left the system suddenly, packed up everything, and moved to a deep space colony without a word of explanation. But I saw the bruises on Alara's face the day before they left. I knew what Zaelen had done. Marcus cursed softly under his breath. Did you tell anyone? I tried to tell father, but Zaelen had already gotten to him first, convinced him that Alara had been spreading lies about our family, trying to get out of an engagement she'd agreed to. Nivra laughed bitterly. Father believed Zaelen over me. He always believed Zaelen over me. And now Zaelen is here looking for you? He knows I could destroy him if I wanted to. All it would take is one transmission to the right people, and his respectable facade would crumble. Nivra turned from the window to face Marcus. But that also means he can't afford to let me stay free. Marcus's jaw tightened. He can't force you to go anywhere, Nivra. This isn't the old regime. Women have rights here. Do they? Nivra's smile was sad. What rights do women like me really have? Zaelen will paint me as the family troublemaker, the ungrateful daughter who ran away rather than face the consequences of her actions. Who's going to believe my word against his? Before Marcus could answer, the sound of a transport engine echoed across the yard. They both moved to the window and saw a man in a fine coat and polished boots sitting in his speeder like he owned the world. That's him, Nivra whispered, her mouth going dry. That's Zaelen. Marcus's hand found her shoulder, warm and steadying. Stay inside. Let me handle this. No, Nivra straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she still possessed. I won't hide from him anymore. I won't let him make me feel ashamed for things I didn't do. They walked out onto the porch together, Marcus slightly ahead of Nivra, but not blocking her from view. Zaelen dismounted with theatrical flourish, his smile sharp as a blade. Well, well, Zaelen called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. Found yourself quite the cozy situation, haven't you, dear sister? Zaelen, Nivra kept her voice level, though her hands were shaking. I can't say I'm surprised to see you. You never could stand it when people didn't do exactly what you wanted. Father's been worried sick about you. Zaelen's eyes flicked to Marcus, assessing, calculating. We've all been wondering where you disappeared to after that unfortunate business in the city. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Marcus Callaway. This is my hydro farm, Nivra Solys. Zaelen smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Nivra's older brother. I'm here to take her home, where she belongs. That's Nivra's decision to make, Marcus said evenly. With respect, Mr. Callaway, this is a family matter. Zaelen's voice took on the smooth, reasonable tone Nivra knew meant danger. Nivra has responsibilities to our father, to the family name. This little arrangement has gone on long enough. Nivra felt the old, familiar weight of shame trying to settle on her shoulders, the voices whispering that she was damaged goods, that she should be grateful for any scraps of acceptance thrown her way. But then she looked at Marcus, saw the quiet strength in his stance, the way he'd positioned himself to support her without taking over. I'm not going back, Zaelen, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I have a job here, honest work that pays honest credits. I don't need Father's forgiveness or your protection. Zaelen's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the cold calculation underneath. I think you do, Nivra, unless you'd prefer I tell your employer here about your colorful past about why Father really threw you out. Go ahead, Nivra said, surprising herself with her calm. Tell him everything. Tell him about Jonathan Hendress and what really happened that night. Tell him how you convinced Father to believe lies over his own daughter's word. Zaelen's eyes narrowed. Careful, sister. You're walking on dangerous ground. No, Nivra said, stepping forward. You are, because I'm not the frightened girl you remember. I've learned some things about standing up for myself. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of tension. Then Zaelen smiled again, and Nivra knew he was about to play his trump card. How touching, he said. But I'm afraid I have more than old gossip to work with now. You see, Nivra, Marshal Patterson is very interested in talking to you about some missing fusion cells from Father's inventory. Seems there's a warrant out for your arrest. The words hit Nivra like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, the world spinning around her. That's a lie, she whispered. Is it? Zaelen's smile widened. I have the paperwork right here. The marshal's very understanding, though. Says if you come home quietly and make restitution, the charges might be dropped. Nivra looked at Marcus, saw the confusion and concern in his eyes, and felt her carefully rebuilt world beginning to crumble around her once again. I never stole anything from my father's inventory. Nivra's voice cut through the cold air like a knife, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Zaelen pulled a folded datapad from his coat pocket, waving it like a weapon. Marshal Patterson disagrees. Says you took nearly 200 credits before you ran away. That's a felony, sister dear. Marcus stepped closer to Nivra, his presence solid and reassuring. Let me see that warrant? I don't think so. Zaelen tucked the datapad back into his coat. This is family business, Mr. Callaway. Best you stay out of it. Nivra's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. 200 credits was more money than she'd ever seen at one time. When would she have had access to that much cash? The inventory rarely kept more than 50 credits in the vault overnight. When am I supposed to have taken this money? She demanded. The night before you left the city, Zaelen said smoothly. Father found it missing the next morning, along with you. What was he supposed to think? He was supposed to think someone else took it. Nivra's voice rose with frustration. Zaelen, you know I would never steal from our own family. Do I? Zaelen's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. You've done plenty of things I never thought you'd do, running off with that Hendress fellow, bringing shame on our family name. That's enough. Marcus's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of authority. Nivra's told me about Hendress. She was the victim there, not the villain. Zaelen laughed, the sound cold and mocking. Oh, she's told you her version, has she? How noble of her to paint herself as the innocent victim. Did she mention how she threw herself at him? How she begged him to take her away from her boring little life? Nivra felt the blood drain from her face. That's not what happened, isn't it? Zaelen moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her ears. Isn't that exactly what you're doing now with your human friend here? Trading your body for shelter, hoping he'll be fool enough to make it permanent? The slap came before Nivra even realized she'd moved. Her palm connected with Zaelen's cheek with a crack that echoed across the yard. He staggered back, his hand flying to his face, genuine shock replacing his smug confidence. How dare you? Nivra breathed, her whole body shaking with rage. How dare you stand there and twist everything to suit your lies? Zaelen straightened slowly, his eyes now holding a dangerous glitter. You just made a very big mistake, Nivra. The only mistake I made was believing you might have changed. Nivra held her ground, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. You're still the same cruel boy who used to pull wings off biodrones just to watch them suffer. That's enough talking. Zaelen reached into his coat again, but this time his hand came out holding a blaster pistol. You're coming with me, Nivra, whether you want to or not. Marcus moved like lightning, stepping between Nivra and the weapon. Put that away before you do something you'll regret. I don't think I'll regret anything. Zaelen kept the gun trained on Marcus, but spoke to Nivra. Your protector here can't be with you every minute of every cycle, and I can be very patient when I need to be. Nivra felt ice forming in her stomach as she realized what Zaelen was really saying. This wasn't just about bringing her home. This was about control, about making sure she could never threaten him with what she knew. What really happened to Alara? She asked suddenly. Zaelen went very still. What did you say? Alara, the girl you hurt 3 cycles ago. Where is she now, Zaelen? I don't know what you're talking about. But Nivra could see the truth in his eyes, in the way his hand tightened on the gun. She's dead, isn't she? That's why her family really left the system so quickly, not because of scandal, but because you killed her. You're being dramatic, Zaelen said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. Am I? Nivra took a step forward, ignoring the gun. How many others have there been, Zaelen? How many women have you silenced over the cycles? Shut up! Zaelen's voice was sharp now, desperate. You don't know anything. I know enough. Nivra felt a strange calm settling over her. I know you're not here because Father wants me back. You're here because I'm the only person left who knows what you really are. Marcus shifted slightly, and Nivra realized he was getting ready to make a move for the gun. She needed to keep Zaelen distracted, keep him focused on her instead of the man beside her. Father doesn't even know you're here, does he? She continued. You forged that warrant. There is no missing money. Zaelen's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the ugly truth underneath. You always were too smart for your own good, little sister. Not smart enough to see what you were until it was too late. Nivra met his eyes squarely. But I see you now. It doesn't matter what you see. Zaelen raised the gun higher. You won't be seeing anything much longer. That's when Marcus moved. He lunged forward, grabbing for Zaelen's wrist. The 2 men struggled, and the gun went off with a sound like thunder. Nivra screamed, certain she was about to see Marcus fall, bleeding in the snow. Instead, it was Zaelen who stumbled backward, the gun flying from his hand to land several feet away. Marcus had managed to twist Zaelen's arm, and the plasma blast had gone harmlessly into the air. But Zaelen wasn't finished. He pulled a vibro blade from his boot, the serrated blade glinting in the morning sun. Should have minded your own business, human. Marcus circled him carefully, his hands empty, but his body coiled like a spring. Last chance to walk away, Whitmore. I don't think so. Zaelen feinted with the vibro blade, testing Marcus's reflexes. Nivra's coming with me one way or another, over my dead body. That can be arranged. Zaelen lunged forward with the vibro blade, but Marcus was ready. He caught Zaelen's wrist and twisted, using the other man's momentum against him. They went down together, rolling in the snow, each fighting for control of the blade. Nivra watched in horror as the 2 men struggled. She could see blood now, though she couldn't tell whose it was. The vibroblade was still between them, still dangerous. Without thinking, she ran for the gun Zaelen had dropped. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the metal cold and heavier than she'd expected. She'd never held a weapon before, never even imagined she might need to. Stop, she shouted, pointing the gun at the fighting men. Zaelen, stop, or I'll shoot. Both men froze, still locked together on the ground. Zaelen looked up at her, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "You won't pull that trigger," he said. "You don't have it in you." Nivra thought about Ilara, about all the other women Zaelen might have heard over the cycles. She thought about the lies he told, the way he tried to destroy her life and was now threatening to kill Marcus. "Try me," she said and meant it. Zaelen slowly released his grip on the vibroblade, his eyes never leaving Nivra's face as she held the gun steady despite her shaking hands. "You've changed, little sister," he said, pushing himself up from the snow. "The Nivra I knew wouldn't hurt a fly." "The Nivra you knew believed family meant something," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She believed people could be trusted, that love was real, that telling the truth mattered. Marcus carefully picked up the vibroblade and backed away, a red liquid seeping through a tear in his shirt sleeve. The wound didn't look deep, but Nivra's heart clenched, seeing proof of how close she'd come to losing him. "Family does mean something," Zaelen said, brushing snow from his expensive coat. "That's why I'm here, to bring you home where you belong." "Home?" Nivra laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You mean back to a place where I'm blamed for your crimes? Where I have to stay quiet about what I know just to keep peace?" Zalen's face hardened. "You don't know anything that matters. I know about the credits you've been skimming from Father's accounts. I know about the deals you've made that would ruin him if they came to light." Nivra kept the gun trained on him, surprised by how natural it felt in her hands now. "I know about the data transmissions you wrote using Father's name, the contracts you signed without his knowledge." For the first time since he'd arrived, Zaelen looked genuinely worried. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Nivra tilted her head, studying her brother's face. "Remember when you thought I was too stupid to understand business? How you used to conduct your meetings right in front of me because women don't have brains for such things?" Zaelen went very still. "I understood more than you realize, Zaelen. I kept track of things in my head because I was bored, because I had nothing else to do while you ignored me." Nivra's voice grew stronger with each word. "I know about the land deals that were supposed to benefit Father but somehow ended up in your name. I know about the debts you ran up gambling and how you've been paying them with money that wasn't yours to take. Even if that were true," Zaelen said carefully, "it's still your word against mine, and who's going to believe a woman with your reputation?" "Maybe no one," Nivra admitted. "But I'm not the frightened girl I used to be. I'm willing to treat." Marcus stepped closer, close enough that Nivra could feel his warmth beside her. "She won't be alone when she tells that story." Zalen's eyes flicked between them, and Nivra could see him calculating, trying to figure out a new angle of attack. "You think he'll stand by you when he learns the whole truth?" Zaelen asked. "When he finds out what really happened with Jonathan Hendris?" Nivra felt Marcus go tense beside her, but she didn't waver. "He already knows the truth. I told him everything." "Did you?" Zaelen smiled, and Nivra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Did you tell him about the credits Hendris paid you? About how you went to his shuttle room 3 times before that final night?" The words hit Nivra like physical blows. She felt Marcus shift beside her, heard his sharp intake of breath. "That's not," she began. "Not what?" Zaelen pressed. "Not true, but it is true, isn't it, Nivra? You took his money every time. 20 credits each visit, if I remember correctly." Nivra's hands began to shake so hard she nearly dropped the gun. "He said it was for expenses, for a new tunic, for dinner. He said he wanted to court me properly, but that I shouldn't have to pay for my own meals." "And you believed him?" Zaelen laughed. "Even when he gave you credits for a shuttle room of your own? Even when he suggested you tell people you were visiting a sick aunt out of town?" The world seemed to tilt around Nivra. She could hear Marcus breathing beside her, could feel the weight of his silence as the pieces fell into place. "He was training you," Zaelen continued relentlessly, "getting you used to taking money for your company, making it seem normal, natural. And when you finally figured out what was really happening, it was too late. You'd already compromised yourself too many times to be believed." Nivra wanted to deny it, wanted to explain that she'd been naive, that she'd trusted someone who'd seemed kind and respectable, but the words stuck in her throat because part of what Zaelen was saying was true. She had taken the money. She had met Jonathan in secret. She had lied about where she was going. I was 17, she whispered. I didn't understand what he was doing. Understanding doesn't matter, Zaelen said gently, using the soft voice he'd perfected for delivering killing blows. Results matter. And the result is that you spent 3 cycles taking money from a man for your company before you finally refused his ultimate demand. Nivra could feel Marcus's eyes on her, could imagine what he must be thinking. The shame she'd fought so hard to overcome came flooding back, drowning her in its familiar darkness. Nivra. Marcus's voice was quiet, careful. Look at me. She couldn't. She couldn't bear to see the disappointment in his eyes, the careful politeness that would replace the warmth she'd grown to treasure. Nivra, look at me, he said again more firmly. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his face. What she saw there made her breath catch, not disappointment, not judgment, but anger directed entirely at Zaelen. You were 17, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. A girl who trusted the wrong man. That doesn't make you anything but young and human. But I took the money because he manipulated you into it. Because he was older and smarter, and he used your trust against you. Marcus never took his eyes off her face. You were the victim, Nivra, not the villain. Zaelen made a sound of disgust. How touching. But it doesn't change the facts. The facts, Marcus said, finally turning to look at Zaelen, are that you're a grown man who spent the last 5 minutes trying to destroy your own sister's spirit for your personal gain. The facts are that you've admitted to stealing from your father and threatening innocent women. I've admitted to nothing. You've admitted to enough. Marcus pulled something from his pocket, a small recording device. I've been recording everything you've said since you got here. Every threat, every confession, every detail about what you've done. Zaelen stared at the device, his face going pale. That won't hold up in any court. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. But it'll be enough to start people asking the right questions. And once they start looking into your business dealings, how long do you think it'll take them to find the truth? For the first time since he'd arrived, Zaelen looked genuinely frightened. He glanced around the hydro farm as if looking for escape routes, his usual confidence finally cracking. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. Nivra's voice was calm now, steady. Because I'm not afraid of you anymore, Zaelen. I'm not afraid of the truth, and I'm not afraid of what people might think. She lowered the gun, no longer needing it. Go home. Tell father whatever story you want, but know that if you ever come after me again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Zaelen looked between them one more time, his face twisting with rage and something that might have been defeat. Then he turned and walked to his transport without another word. Nivra and Marcus stood side by side, watching him fly away until he was just a dark speck against the white landscape. Only then did Nivra allow herself to breathe again. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For believing me? For not thinking less of me when you learned the whole truth? Marcus was quiet for a moment, then reached out and gently took the gun from her hands. The truth is that you were 17 and alone, and someone took advantage of that. The truth is that you survived something that would have broken most people. The truth is that you are the strongest person I've ever met. Nivra felt tears starting to fall, but for the first time in cycles, they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Is it really over? She asked. Marcus looked toward the horizon where Zaelen had disappeared, then back at her face. I don't know, he said honestly, but whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The transmission arrived on a Tuesday morning that started with Nivra burning the synth biscuits and ended with her world turning upside down once again. Marcus rode back from the outpost with his face grim and a yellow data chip clutched in his hand. Nivra knew before he even dismounted that Zaelen had kept his word about making trouble for them. Marshal Patterson wants to see you, Marcus said without preamble, holding out the chip. Says there's been new developments in your case. Nivra's hands shook as she read the official words. Zaelen had been busy since leaving the hydro farm a week ago. According to the transmission, he'd filed formal charges with the Territorial Command. complete with sworn statements from 3 witnesses who claimed to have seen Nivra taking money from her father's inventory. 3 witnesses? Nivra repeated, sinking onto the porch steps. Zaelen has found 3 people willing to lie for him. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. What kind of hold does he have over these people? Credits, probably. Or secrets. Nivra stared at the data chip until the words blurred together. Zaelen has always been good at finding people's weak spots and pressing on them until they do what he wants. A new thought struck her, cold and terrible. Marcus, what if Marshall Patterson believes them? What if there really is a warrant now? Then we'll deal with it. Marcus's voice was calm, but Nivra could see the tension in his jaw. We'll get you a legal representative. Fight this properly. With what credits? Nivra laughed bitterly. Zaelen knows we can't afford a real legal representative. He's counting on that. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the wind move through the crystalline trees. Nivra felt the old, familiar weight of hopelessness settling on her shoulders like a heavy coat. Maybe I should just go, she said quietly. Leave the outpost tonight, head to the outer rim where Zaelen can't find me. Running won't solve anything, Marcus said. And besides, you're not facing this alone. Nivra turned to look at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. Marcus, you can't get involved in this. If Zaelen can fabricate charges against me, he can do the same to you. Let him try. Marcus's gray eyes were steady on hers. I'm not letting you face your brother's lies by yourself. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why are you willing to risk everything for me? Marcus was quiet for so long that Nivra thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I love you, he said simply. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but there it is. I love you, Nivra Solys, and I'm not letting anyone hurt you if I can help it. The words hit Nivra like lightning, illuminating corners of her heart she thought were dead forever. She'd dreamed of hearing those words from him, but not like this, not when everything was falling apart around them. You can't love me, she whispered. You don't really know me. You don't know all the things I've done, all the mistakes I've made. I know enough. Marcus reached for her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. I know you're brave and honest and kind. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you make this place feel like home in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Tears spilled down Nivra's cheeks. And I love you too. That's why I can't let you destroy your life for me. You're not destroying anything. Marcus's thumb traced across her knuckles. You're giving me a reason to fight for something that matters. Before Nivra could respond, they heard the sound of multiple transports approaching. Marshal Patterson rode into the yard with 2 deputies, their faces serious beneath the brim of their helmets. Miss Whitmore, the marshal called out, dismounting near the porch. I'm afraid I need you to come with me. Marcus stood, his hand moving instinctively to Nivra's shoulder. On what charges, Marshal? Theft, fraud, and now fleeing to avoid prosecution. Marshal Patterson pulled a folded datapad from his coat. This is a federal warrant signed by the territorial judge himself. Nivra stared at the official-looking document, her mind reeling. Zaelen had managed to get a federal judge involved. That meant real legal battles, real consequences that could include years in a correctional facility. I want to see that warrant, Marcus said, stepping forward. Marshal Patterson handed it over reluctantly. Marcus read it carefully, his frown deepening with each line. This says Nivra stole 500 credits, Marcus said. Yesterday, the transmission said it was 200. New evidence came to light, the marshal replied. Seems Miss Whitmore was busier than anyone realized. Nivra felt the trap closing around her. Zaelen was escalating the charges, making them so serious that no one would question why he was pursuing them so aggressively. Marshal, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, I'd like to send a transmission before you take me in. That's not how this works, miss. Please, Barsaides. Nivra met his eyes directly. Just one transmission to Judge Morrison in the core worlds. He knows my family, knows my character. Surely I have the right to contact someone who can vouch for me. Marshal Patterson looked uncomfortable. I suppose that would be within your rights. Marcus squeezed Nivra's shoulder. I'll send it for you. What you wanted to say? Nivra thought quickly. Judge Morrison had always been fair, had known her since she was a child. If anyone would listen to her side of the story, it would be him. Tell him Zaelen Solys is filing false charges against me, she said. Ask him to investigate Zaelen's business dealings over the past 3 cycles. Tell him to ask about Alara. The marshal's eyebrows rose. Alara is Judge Morrison's niece. Nivra felt a spark of hope. She'd forgotten that connection, but it might be exactly what she needed. Then he'll be very interested in what really happened to her, Nivra said quietly. Marshal Patterson looked between Nivra and Marcus, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he sighed. I'll give you until tomorrow morning to get that transmission sent and wait for a response, he said. But if there's no word by then, I have to take you in. Those are my orders. After the marshal and his deputies left, Nivra and Marcus sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. The transmission had been sent, and now all they could do was wait and hope that Judge Morrison would remember the girl who used to help his wife with her charity work. What if he doesn't respond? Nivra asked. Then we'll figure out our next move. Marcus pulled her closer, and she leaned into his warmth. But I have a feeling your brother has finally overplayed his hand. How can you be so confident? Marcus smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. Because Zaelen made one very big mistake. What's that? He involved Judge Morrison's family. Marcus's voice was satisfied. And from what I know about the judge, he doesn't take kindly to people who hurt the people he cares about. Nivra allowed herself to hope, just a little. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe Zaelen had finally pushed too far, been too greedy, involved too many powerful people in his schemes. But as they sat together in the growing darkness, Nivra couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. Zaelen had resources she didn't, connections she couldn't match. Even if Judge Morrison believed her, would it be enough to stop her brother's campaign to destroy her? She pressed closer to Marcus, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least she wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand beside her and fight for her. That had to count for something. Judge Morrison's response arrived at dawn, carried by a messenger who traveled through the night to deliver it. Nivra stood in her nightclothes on the front porch, reading the transmission by lamplight, while Marcus held a lantern beside her. The words seemed to dance on the page, almost too good to believe. Zaelen left the core worlds under investigation for fraud, she read aloud, her voice shaking with excitement. Alara died from injuries received during an assault. Her family suspected Zaelen, but had no proof. Judge Morrison requesting immediate investigation into all charges filed by Zaelen Solys. Marcus let out a whoop that probably woke every bio-creature on the hydro farm. I told you that man had overplayed his hand. But Nivra's attention was caught by the final line of the transmission. There's more, she said quietly. Judge Morrison says he's sending a federal marshal Williams to investigate personally. He should arrive today. The words hung in the air between them. A federal marshal meant this was serious business now, beyond what Zaelen could manipulate with credits and local connections. Nivra, Marcus said gently, this is good news. This is what we wanted. I know. Nivra folded the transmission carefully, her hands trembling. It's just, after all this time thinking no one would believe me, it's hard to accept that someone finally does. They spent the morning in a strange state of nervous energy. Nivra cleaned the same terminals 3 times and swept floors that were already spotless. Marcus found excuses to check the livestock repeatedly, though there was nothing wrong with any of them. By noon, they were both watching the horizon for any sign of transports. Marshal Williams arrived just as Nivra was burning her second batch of synthetic biscuits. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, accompanied by 2 deputies who looked like they'd seen plenty of trouble in their time. Miss Whitmore, the marshal said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. I'm Marshal Williams. Judge Morrison sent me to get to the bottom of this situation. Nivra wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how she must look. Thank you for coming, Marshal. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Judge Morrison's word carries weight with me, Marshal Williams said. And I've been looking into your brother's activities for the past day. Interesting reading. Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Callaway. This is my hydrofarm. The marshal shook his hand, studying Marcus with those sharp eyes. Judge Morrison mentioned you'd been harboring Miss Whitmore. Some might see that as suspicious. Some might, Marcus agreed, but anyone who knew Nivra would see it as the right thing to do. Marshal Williams smiled slightly. Spoken like a man who's not afraid of the truth. I appreciate that. He turned back to Nivra. Now, Miss Whitmore, I need you to tell me everything you know about your brother's business dealings. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. For the next 2 hours, Nivra told her story. Every detail about Zaelen, about Jonathan Hendress, about the lies and manipulations that had driven her from home. Marshal Williams listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small data pad. When she finished, the marshal was quiet for several minutes, studying his notes. Your brother has been busy, he said finally. We found evidence of fraud in 3 different systems, forged documents, stolen credits, and at least 2 other women who have accused him of assault. Nivra felt vindicated and sick at the same time. So I was right about him. You were right about everything, Marshal Williams confirmed. The charges against you are completely fabricated. Your father never filed any complaint, never reported any missing money. Zaelen forged the initial paperwork and bribed 3 men to sign false statements. Marcus let out a breath Nivra didn't realize he'd been holding. So Nivra's free? Miss Whitmore was never guilty of anything except having a criminal for a brother, the marshal said firmly. The charges against her are dropped, and there's now a federal warrant out for Nivra Solys' arrest. Nivra felt her knees go weak with relief. Marcus caught her arm, steadying her as the weight of months of fear and uncertainty finally lifted from her shoulders. What happens now? She asked. Now you get to live your life without looking over your shoulder, Marshal Williams said. As for your brother, he's gone to ground somewhere, but we'll find him eventually. Men like Zaelen always make mistakes. After the marshal left, Nivra and Marcus sat in the kitchen, sharing a pot of caffeine and trying to absorb what had happened. The danger that had hung over them for so long was finally gone. I can hardly believe it's over, Nivra said, staring into her cup. Believe it. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. You're free, Nivra. Free to be whoever you want to be, go wherever you want to go. The words should have filled her with joy, but instead Nivra felt a strange sadness. Where do you think I should go? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That depends, he said finally. On what? On whether you meant what you said yesterday about loving me. Nivra looked up, meeting his gray eyes directly. I meant every word. Then I have a question for you. Marcus stood up and walked around the table, dropping to one knee beside her chair. Nivra Solys, will you marry me? Will you stay here and help me turn this hydro farm into the home it was always meant to be? Nivra stared down at him, this man who had given her shelter when she was desperate, work when she needed purpose, and love when she'd forgotten her own worth. The answer rose in her chest like sunrise. Yes, she said, the word carrying all the weight of choice, of love, freely given rather than desperately traded. Yes, I'll marry you. When Marcus kissed her, it tasted like promises and new beginnings, like the sweet air of spring after a harsh winter. And Nivra realized that she had indeed traded herself for shelter that cold night months ago. But what she'd received in return wasn't just a roof over her head or food to eat. She'd found her home, her heart, and a future built on the radical idea that love doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be true. Outside, the wind carried the scent of growing things, of earth ready for planting, of seasons turning toward hope. And in the kitchen of the hydro farm that would soon be her true home, Nivra Solys learned what it meant to be loved, not in spite of her scars, but because of the strength they represented. The past was finally past. The future stretched ahead of them like the vast Cryonith sky, uncertain, challenging, but theirs to shape together. The transmission arrived 3 weeks after Marcus proposed, carried by a postal transport that seemed surprised to find Nivra still alive and well at the Callaway hydro farm. Nivra recognized her father's careful handwriting immediately, though the envelope was thicker than his usual brief correspondence. Her hands shook as she broke the wax seal, uncertain whether the contents would bring more heartache or hope. My dearest Nivra, the letter began, and those 3 words alone made her eyes fill with tears. Her father hadn't called her dearest since she was a child. I write to you with a heart full of shame and regret. Marshall Williams visited me last week and revealed the truth about Zaelen, truths I should have seen cycles ago if I hadn't been blinded by pride and foolish trust in the wrong child. Nivra sank into the kitchen chair, Marcus reading over her shoulder as she continued. I know now that Zaelen has been stealing from our business for cycles, using my name to conduct fraudulent deals, and, worse, far worse, that he has hurt innocent women and allowed you to bear the blame for his crimes. I cannot undo the damage I caused by believing his lies over your truth. I cannot give you back the months of suffering you endured because of my failure as a father. Marcus's hand settled warm and steady on Nivra's shoulder as she wiped away tears. If you can find it in your heart to forgive a foolish old man, I would like very much to see you again. Not to ask you to come home. I understand you have built a new life, and from what Marshall Williams tells me, you have found happiness with a good man who sees your true worth. I simply want the chance to tell my daughter that I love her, that I am proud of the strength she has shown, and that I am sorry beyond words for the pain I caused. The letter continued with news from the city, updates on the business, and careful questions about her new life. But it was the final paragraph that made Nivra's breath catch. I have enclosed a deed to the property your mother left you, the small homestead outside the city that Zaelen convinced me to put in his name for safekeeping. It is rightfully yours, worth enough to ensure you never want for security. Consider it a poor attempt at making amends, and know that whether you choose to see me again or not, you will always be my beloved daughter. Nivra stared at the official-looking document that had fallen from the envelope. 20 acres of good terraformed land, plus a house and a processing unit. It was worth more credits than she'd ever imagined having. Nivra, Marcus's voice was careful, controlled. That's a substantial gift. She looked up at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart sink. You think I should go back? I think. Marcus moved to the window, staring out at the hydro farm that had become their shared world. I think your father is offering you something I can't. Security, independence, the chance to reconcile with your family. And you think I should take it? The words came out flat, lifeless. Marcus turned back to her, his gray eyes holding more pain than she'd ever seen. I think I love you too much to ask you to stay, if leaving would make you happier. Nivra felt anger rising in her chest, hot and unexpected. So that's it? After everything we've been through, you're just gonna let me walk away? I'm not letting you do anything, Marcus said quietly. I'm trying to give you the choice you've never had before, the choice to decide your own future without desperation or fear, forcing your hand. My future is here, Nivra stood up, the letter falling forgotten to the floor. My future is with you, on this hydro farm, building something together. Is it? Marcus's voice was gentle but relentless. Or is it just the best option you thought you had? Nivra, you came here because you were starving and desperate. You stayed because Zaelen was threatening you. Now that you're free, really free, are you sure this is still what you want? The question hit Nivra like cold water. Was Marcus right? Had she only chosen this life because she'd had no other choices? I don't know, she whispered, the admission tearing at her heart. I don't know anymore. Marcus nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Then maybe you should go visit your father. See what your old life looks like now that you're free to choose it. See if the homestead feels like home. And if it does, Nivra's voice was barely audible, then you'll know you made the right choice. Marcus managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And I'll know I loved you enough to let you find your own happiness. Nivra wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she'd already found her happiness right here. But doubt had crept into her heart like poison, making her question everything she thought she knew about her own feelings. That evening, they sat on opposite sides of the kitchen table, Marcus working on station accounts, Nivra pretending to read. But the comfortable silence they'd shared for months had been replaced by an awkward tension that made every breath feel difficult. How long would you be gone? Marcus asked without looking up from his ledger. I don't know, a few cycles maybe. Nivra closed her book, abandoning any pretense of reading. Marcus, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you, I know. Marcus finally looked at her, his expression careful and controlled. But wanting something because it's what you know isn't the same as choosing it because it's what you truly desire. Nivra felt tears starting to fall. What if I go and realize I made a mistake? What if I come back and you've decided you don't want me anymore? Marcus was quiet for so long that Nivra thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Nivra, I've been alone for 2 cycles. If you choose to come back to me, it'll be because you want to, not because you have to. That's worth waiting for. 3 days later, Nivra stood on the transport platform in Cryo Spaceport, a small suitcase in her hand and Marcus beside her, looking like he was attending a funeral. All right, she said, though the words felt inadequate. I'd like that. Marcus handed her an envelope. This is for you. Don't open it until you're on the transport. Nivra tucked the envelope into her coat pocket, then turned to face the man who had given her everything: shelter, work, love, and now the freedom to choose her own path. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For loving me enough to let me go. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd been crying. Come back to me, Nivra. Not because you have to, but because you want to. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of all the words they couldn't bring themselves to say. When the transport whistle blew, Nivra forced herself to step away from him and climb aboard. As the transport pulled away from the station, Nivra pressed her face to the viewport, watching Marcus grow smaller and smaller until he was just a speck on the platform. Only then did she open his letter. Nivra, our medicine dated. Nivra. It read, I hope your journey brings you peace and certainty about what you truly want. Know that whatever you decide, these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You taught me that love isn't about possession or desperation. It's about seeing someone's true worth and wanting their happiness above your own. If that happiness lies elsewhere, then I will find a way to be grateful for the time we had. But if it lies here with me, then I'll be waiting always. With all my love, Marcus. Nivra folded the letter carefully and tucked it against her heart, watching the Cryonith landscape roll past the viewport. She was heading toward her past, but for the first time in her life, she was making the journey as a free woman with the power to choose her own destiny. The question was, what would that choice be? Nivra stepped off the transport in the core city 6 cycles later, her heart pounding as she scanned the platform for her father's familiar figure. She spotted him near the station house, older than she remembered, his hair more gray, his shoulders slightly stooped. But when he saw her, his face lit up with such pure joy that Nivra felt the last of her anger toward him melt away. Nivra, her father's voice broke on her name as he hurried forward. My dear girl, you came. They embraced there on the platform, and Nivra was surprised by how small he felt in his arms, how fragile the stern, unyielding man who had thrown her out had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely broken by regret. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I'm so very sorry for everything. Nivra pulled back to look at his face, seeing tears in eyes that had always been too proud to show weakness. I know, Papa. Marshall Williams told me what Zaelen did, how he manipulated all of us. Her father nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he cleared his throat and gestured toward a waiting ground car. Come, let me show you the homestead. It's yours now to do with as you please. The drive through the city was strange and painful. People Nivra had known all her life stared openly as they passed, some with curiosity, others with what might have been shame. Word had gotten out about Zaelen's arrest and the false charges against Nivra. The whole city knew now that she'd been innocent all along. How are they treating you? Nivra asked as they left the main street behind. With embarrassment, mostly. Her father managed a rueful smile. Turns out Zaelen fooled more people than just me. Half the businessmen in the city had dealings with him that weren't quite what they seemed. The homestead lay 3 miles outside the city, nestled in a valley that Nivra remembered from childhood visits to her mother's sister. The house was smaller than the hydro farm, but well-built and charming, with a wraparound porch and viewports that caught the afternoon light. Your mother always loved this place, her father said as they walked through the empty rooms. Said it felt peaceful, like somewhere a person could think clearly. Nivra ran her fingers along the mantel in the front room, imagining herself living here. It would be a good life, quiet, respectable, free from the hard physical labor of station work. She could grow a garden in the biodome, maybe take in sewing to supplement the income from renting out the farmland. It was everything she'd dreamed of during those desperate months on the streets. So why did it feel so empty? Papa, she said as they finished the tour, tell me about Mama, what she was like when she was young. Her father's eyes grew distant. Your mother was the bravest woman I ever knew. Not brave like a soldier, but brave like someone who wasn't afraid to fight for what mattered to her. He sat heavily on the porch steps. She chose me over 3 other suitors, including one who could have given her a much easier life. When I asked her why, she said home wasn't a place or a circumstance. It was the person whose dreams became tangled up with your own. Nivra felt her breath catch. She said that. Those exact words. Her father looked at her intently. Nivra, I want you to have this homestead because it's rightfully yours. But more than that, I want you to have the choice your mother had, the choice to follow your heart instead of your fears. That evening, Nivra sat alone on the homestead porch, watching the binary sun set over the valley. She'd written 3 transmissions to Marcus and torn them all up, unable to find words for the confusion in her heart. The homestead was lovely. Her father was genuinely repentant and eager to rebuild their relationship. She could have a peaceful, secure life here, free from gossip and judgment. But as the stars came out overhead, all Nivra could think about was another porch, another sunset, and the way Marcus's eyes crinkled when he laughed at something she'd said. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson, the marshal's wife, arrived with a basket of preserves and news from the wider world. Heard you were back, she said, settling into a chair with the comfortable authority of a woman who'd known Nivra since childhood. Also heard you've been living on Marcus Callaway's hydro farm. Yes, ma'am. Nivra poured caffeine, waiting for whatever judgment was coming. Good man, Marcus. Lost his father in a gamma flare accident when he was barely 16, but kept that hydro farm going through sheer determination. Mrs. Patterson studied Nivra over her cup. Heard he's been alone since his fiancée died. Must be lonely out there. Nivra felt tears threatening. I imagine it is. Of course, some folks are meant for solitude. Others need someone to share the work and the worry. Mrs. Patterson's voice was casual, but her eyes were shrewd. Question is, which kind are you? That afternoon, Nivra walked to the small cemetery outside the city where her mother was buried. She knelt by the headstone, tracing the carved letters with her finger. I don't know what to do, Mama, she whispered. Papa says you chose love over security, but what if I'm just afraid of being alone again? What if I'm confusing gratitude with love? The wind rustled through the grass, and Nivra could almost hear her mother's voice. What does your heart tell you when you imagine never seeing him again? The answer came immediately, clear and devastating. Her heart told her that losing Marcus would be like losing part of herself. The hydro farm had become home not because it was safe, but because it was where Marcus was. That she'd rather face uncertainty with him than security without him. Nivra stood up, a decision crystallizing like ice forming on water. She knew what she had to do. 2 hours later, she was on the evening transport back to Cryonith, her father's blessing in her pocket and hope singing in her veins. The homestead would always be there if she needed it. But her life, her real life, was waiting for her at a hydro farm where a man with gray eyes and gentle hands was probably sitting on the porch watching the horizon. As the transport carried her through the darkness toward home, Nivra smiled and touched Marcus's letter where it lay against her heart. She was going back not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. The transport pulled into Cryo Spaceport just as the binary suns were rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Nivra of new beginnings. She stepped onto the platform with her small suitcase, scanning the area for a way to get to the hydro farm. Instead, she found Marcus leaning against the station wall, his hat pulled low but his eyes unmistakable. You came, she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. Been here every morning since you left, Marcus replied, pushing away from the wall. Figured if you decided to come back, I wanted to be the first thing you saw. Nivra dropped her suitcase and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck as he lifted her off her feet. When he set her down, his hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Really sure this is what you want?" "I'm sure," Nivra said, meaning it completely. "I choose you, Marcus Callaway. I choose us. I choose this life we're building together, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine wanting anything else." When he kissed her this time, it tasted like coming home after a long journey, like promises made and kept, like the sweet certainty of love freely chosen. And as they walked together toward the hydro farm that would soon be their shared home, Nivra realized that she had indeed traded herself for shelter that desperate winter night. But what she'd received in return was so much more than survival. She'd found her courage, her worth, and a love that asked nothing of her except the truth of her own heart. The future stretched ahead of them like the vast Cryonith sky, uncertain, challenging, but theirs to shape together. And for the first time in her life, Nivra Solys was exactly where she belonged,